Hi everyone, and welcome to our Estimating in Commercial and Logistics training session for Offsite Ready, the project that delivers knowledge for change. My name is Katrina Jordan, and I am an architect and lecturer at the City of Glasgow College. We are a project partner for the Offsite Ready project. This is our second training session of the series. The remaining two sessions will be delivered over the next consecutive weeks, jointly with Construction Scotland Innovation Centre. We are delighted that you have joined us today for Estimating Commercial and Logistics modules. The content can and will equip educators and trainers in all areas of offsite construction. This flexible programme is free and easy to use. This morning we will start with Estimating in Commercial, firstly with an overview of the subject area, with opportunity for question and answer, and then we'll move on to logistics. Before we go any further, I would like to ask, if you'd like to ask a question, please click on the chat icon. We also will have polls, and the first polls just come in. Which area do you educate or train in? Education construction, education built environment, industry construction, industry design, or industry supply? The polls will be on throughout the webinar, and we are keen for you to participate in them. The results are in, and most people are from education built environment sector, education construction, and also in the construction industry as well. I would like to welcome the panellists today, myself, Dr. Owen Plant-O'Toole from Napier University, Lindsay Richards from the University of Wales, Trinity St David. In addition to her work at university, Lindsay is Managing Director of Richards Partnership Limited, a chartered surveyors and engineers. We also will have a valuation form at the end. Please complete it, as it will help us provide you with the best service we can. I'm going to get started, and let's take a look at our Estimating in Commercial overview video.
Every construction project has a commercial and business operations side. Indeed, this module on estimating in commercial can be considered the backbone of any offsite enterprise, regardless of scale and location. Similar to the other Offsite Ready videos, we will cover some main differences between offsite and on-site construction, benefits and challenges for offsite construction, followed by applications and future opportunities. So here we go. The main difference between offsite and on-site construction when it comes to commercial process lies in the decision-making process of the procurement stage. I spoke on this topic with Anne Bentley, Global Board Director at Riddell Levitt Bucknell in London, to get to the bottom of what the differences are in the real world. With the traditional procurement model, the design typically progresses past planning approval without regards for the construction method. After the project goes to tender, contractors offer different construction methods to achieve the design at various costs. With offsite construction, the decision that a part of the building process will be transferred to a factory environment needs to be taken much sooner, ideally in the initial strategic definition stage. In this way, the design can be informed by the dimensional limitations of the selected offsite construction system. Transport regulations, for example, which we'll cover in more detail in the logistics video, can influence the standard width, height and length of the offsite system. If the building spatial design does not consider the component-based construction with standard dimensions, it is often complicated and time-consuming to reconfigure the approved design for offsite manufacturing. In this way, unfortunately, the opportunity to use offsite construction will be eliminated rapidly, simply due to timings in the procurement process. Offsite construction offers several estimating and commercial benefits. One of the leading benefits recognized by clients is reliability in resources management. With the increased control over materials and labor costs in the factory, the client can have higher certainty that the first cost figure they are presented with will also be the actual sum to be paid for the manufacturing parts of the project. Afterwards, in the construction stage, the rapid component-based installation of offsite systems can ensure that the project is also delivered on time. As we all know, time is money. And this is especially true on a building site, where increased time means increased staff, plant, permits and loan costs. In this way, with predictable and often reduced construction times, offsite systems offer the advantage of more reliable cost estimations. Unfortunately, offsite construction also has some challenges, especially in the level of required upfront capital investment in manufacturing facilities. At Ilke Homes in Yorkshire, for example, funding of more than £30 million was required to set up and scale up the factory to its current production of approximately 2,000 homes per year. In the fragmented construction industry, with many micro, small and medium enterprises, an investment of this scale is not to be underestimated. The level of the upfront investment will depend on the size of the factory and its level of automation. Often businesses start production with manual processes, and after some income is generated and built up, they invest it in gradually purchasing equipment and skills training. Another often encountered financial issue in offsite construction is cash flow. In the factory environment, all materials for the given project need to be procured in time for start of manufacturing with their relative lead-in times. This can mean everything from the structural materials such as steel, timber or concrete to the light bulbs and washing machines. This is why staged payments are often requested by the manufacturer to alleviate some of the pressure of having to spend company resources on labor, plant and materials up front. Understandably, the staged payments at set intervals can make the clients apprehensive, as they are providing payment before the project is completed. In practice, estimating for offsite construction in comparison to on-site construction can be challenging. If you don't have experience in estimating for offsite materials, plant and labor, it can be difficult to find accurate information in the standard databases and books. A useful starting point to understand estimation for offsite construction can be the Structural Timber Association's Masonry and Timber Frame Cost Comparison Report, published in May 2018, which showed that the two systems were on par in terms of costs to the client. Where offsite can offer application advantages over other construction systems is in understanding the whole life cycle cost of a project. With the help of building information modeling, not only the construction but also the operating and maintenance costs of a building can be predicted early on in the process. Anne Bentley mentioned an example project where the main contractor was hired to upkeep the building for 3 years after construction. This meant that all the building works were delivered to a high standard and according to the specification, so as to make the contractor's job easier later on. These are exactly the types of advances we expect to see in the future on estimating and commercial work for offsite construction. What we may also see is increased use of design for manufacture and assembly plus disassembly, or DFMA plus D for short. This takes into consideration the reuse or refurbishment of some of the offsite components. Use of DFMA plus D can form an even more comprehensive and more sustainable picture of the building's whole life cycle costs. Another future opportunity to help drive more use of offsite in the construction industry is the development of more collaborative procurement models. In summary, Estimating commercial activities are a key aspect to guarantee the success of an offsite project. The early engagement of all partners and the supply chain is fundamental in offsite construction projects. If the offsite manufacturer is involved early, costs for the manufacturing and on-site construction can be predictable for the client. Some challenges are, however, the upfront investment and accurate comparison to other building systems. In application, offsite construction can offer a better understanding of the whole life cycle costs. In the next few years, we expect to see this develop further alongside more collaborative procurement models. Congratulations on completing the Offsite Ready Estimating and Commercial video. Stay tuned to gain more knowledge for change in logistics in the next video.
I hope that gave you a good overview of estimating in commercial. Before we go any further, we have another poll. Which strategic stage of offsite construction is the most significant in regards to estimating in commercial? Strategic definition, concept design, spatial coordination, manufacturing and construction. And the results have come in, strategic definition and also manufacturing and construction coming in as the most highest in regards to the most significant in estimating commercial. Now I would like to show you a video interview with Jamie Hellier from Aker Law discussing all things procurement and contracts. Hi and welcome to our Offsite Ready Estimating in Commercial training session, the project that delivers knowledge for change. Today we have Jamie Hellier, a founding partner at Aker Law, a company which focuses on modern methods of construction. Prior to that, Jamie was a director at Care Construction. Welcome, Jamie, and thank you for joining us today. Just want to dive straight into the questions. Can you describe the main differences that should be considered in procurement processes for offsite construction compared to traditional construction?
Yeah, of course, and thank you. So I think there are certainly differences between offsite and traditional construction, but probably less so if you compared what I call offsite and good practice. And the reason that I make that distinction is one of preparedness and planning. Attempting to retrofit offsite thinking into a project, particularly at a late stage, is unlikely to yield benefits, and probably quite the contrary. So instead, offsite solutions really requires strategy, it requires planning and forethought. And that's shown up when if you took the time to review the REBA DFMA overlay, you would see a number of considered activities, particularly in the early stages, relating to procurement. Offsite solutions certainly necessitate design teams to consider design for manufacture and assembly, so DFMA, and therefore challenge a team to examine not only how best a building can be constructed, but how components of a building can be manufactured to aid the building process. So developing procurement models that facilitate this creates a change in emphasis, it creates a change in roles, and it creates a change in activities. And selection of the team, their offsite experience, their awareness can be probably the first key distinction. And this carries through in developing a procurement strategy, which should be shaped to afford flexibility, not only for the varying technical solutions, but also an emphasis towards behaviours for effective collaboration as well. Now, the appropriateness of early contractor engagement, particularly around ownership of design, is a key distinction. That very much depends upon whether an offsite solution, what it is and where it sits along the 7 categories of the MMC definition framework as provided by the MHCLG. I think if you focused at it from a more commercial perspective, the principle of procuring offsite solutions certainly raises question marks around cost transparency, how you can maintain competitive tension, If you move towards a single action procurement process, there's question marks around the balance sheet of some offsite specialists and their capacity to assume risk. And also there is for procurers a shift in risk profile, not only from transitioning works offsite, but also the design responsibility. And again, all of the profiles of what I've just mentioned are not only dependent upon the type of offsite activity, but also the project specifics and particulars, the market context, and that's probably particularly pertinent in this sort of COVID environment, but also your client's tolerance to risk. I think all of them are resolvable, but they each require consideration. And for me, the key distinction is they require that consideration at an early strategic stage of a project, given that they are certainly not following that traditional process. The final one I would raise is between offsite and traditional is around value. Offsite solutions necessitate a clear focus on value, and that might sound a really simple concept, but often cost is perceived as the exclusive value driver. I think offsite solutions challenges anyone in a procurement position to really truly understand what is the value drivers of the project, as well as the business that is seeking to procure it, and in turn the reason for offsite. Offsite solutions are an enabler, they're not an end in itself, and therefore considering offsite needs to be done so in the context of what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. In your opinion, with widely available contracts in the market, do you think any of these are suitable for offsite construction? And if not, why not?
Okay, I think this may well sound like a politician's answer, but I think they're all suitable and unsuitable to in the same manner. As standard contracts, they offer a framework which can be utilised, but as a standard, they don't necessarily reflect the nuances. And that's why within the industry, we're all familiar with the fact that there are thousands of amendments and contracts are typically heavily amended. And the reason for doing so, the key issues are predominantly in the context of offsite relate to definition of scope, risk and valuation. And that might manifest itself, whether it be quality assessment and valuation, how and when valuation will be assessed and quality certified in an offsite environment as opposed to being on site. It might be an issue around title, particularly prominent when you consider the risk of insolvency. And that applies certainly in the volumetric end of the spectrum, how components that might be part of a production line can be vested, how step-in rights might operate. It might be practical risk apportionment aspects, such as who carries the risk for damage in transportation. That probably isn't expressly identified or dealt with under defined contract terms. Similarly, in regards to design, as design apportionment and ownership shifts, that has implications particularly around intellectual property rights, where a client is typically given a copyright license to use the IP, but they might want to apply volumetric solutions to a much broader portfolio. So all of those issues, I think, again, are resolvable. I don't think any of them are new. And for those companies that procure items like lifts, capital plant, or curtain walling systems, they'll have all experienced challenges of developing contracts that accommodate for locations of manufactured goods beyond the site demise. But I think a more consistent approach for addressing that has to be a step forward. Where the NEC prepared a practical note probably about 18 months ago, and I would expect that other standard form contract producers will follow suit, which in my view has to be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Thinking about in terms of design fees, it's very important within a design process for offsite construction projects, but it's equally important from an estimating and commercial perspective. Why is that?
I think design freeze is important because it gives definition and alignment of scope. And if you're in an estimating or procuring or commercial position, that's really key, because you need to be clear about what has been priced relative to what's been drawn. That is how you ensure there is internal alignment, and equally provide your customer with clarity of your offer. I think as models start to evolve, that is building information modeling and BIM, and they become rich with more cost data, then the traceability of change will start to dilute the importance of design freeze. But certainly in the first instance, being able to apply prices at a component level will enable estimating and commercial teams to be more dynamic and work with greater speed in parallel with iterative designs. But as we sit here today, the basic principles of having a defined design which is aligned with a scope and a price and a set of commercial descriptions that follow is absolutely key, whether that be in a traditional or offsite sense.
Sure. An offsite construction differs to that of traditional construction in terms that it's front loaded. The client needs to invest more before any manufacturing starts. But what are the long-term benefits of that approach?
Yeah, I think the long-term benefits of offsite have been championed for many years. Our organisation, myself, we advocate modern methods of construction, but actually quite a lot of MMC is not actually that modern. I think the principles of the benefits are pretty broadly accepted, whether that be reduction in construction program time, increased certainty, reduction in on-site labour, with subsequent improvements on health and safety. Equally, a reduction in reliance upon skilled labour, a point that Mark Farmer through Modernise and or Die has highlighted, as well as construction quality, and I think now the better environmental outcomes, not least reducing waste, all of which, when you throw in the mix, leads to a more productive and improved industry. And to that extent, I think one of the trends that we, certainly I've observed over the last couple of years, is the drive behind offsite solutions is becoming greater than just building things better and quicker. And more importantly, it's now focusing upon building better things. Now, how those benefits are actually realised by individual clients, I think depends on their individual business model and their needs. And that, for me, is why you should conduct that strategic review for a project or a portfolio, and why I mentioned earlier about the principle of offsite being the enabler to better outcomes, not the outcome in itself.
Sure, that makes sense. Could you tell us a little bit about any innovative projects that you're currently working on?
The first one is a piece of work that we've been doing for a while in collaboration with the Social Profit Calculator. They're an organisation that is focused around social value, and we've supported them to develop a calculator dedicated to offsite solutions.
Right.
So similar to the government's principle of levelling up to address regional disparity and depravity, we've worked with a couple of other partners, Kier, Pagabo and RLB, to create a tool that quantifies the benefit of social value investment within offsite solutions relative to traditional options.
Wow, that's great.
And by giving that direct comparison, it enables projects to consciously address skills shortages in one area by moving activities to locations across the country and hopefully sustain sustainable employment in other areas. So the other projects that we're particularly proud of that we've taken an active role in is the platform project with the Construction Innovation Hub.
Right.
And I guess for those that aren't aware, it's a project that is designed and has the ambition to share and shape a more sustainable solution for the government's new build programme. And it does through collaboration of a raft of industry players, much broader than just our company, focused on developing a prototype, testing and demonstrating a platform solutions using a kit of parts. So kits of parts is something we've previously undertaken. It's an area that we're keen to work and collaborate with others, and there's some really fantastic organisations that are party and privy to that. And for us, I think it's an opportunity which hopefully will make an impact on the industry.
Yeah, brilliant. Two excellent projects. Thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us today. and thank you for your continuous support in the Offsite Ready project.
Well, thank you. Again, appreciation of the work that you're doing. Many thanks for inviting us, and for anyone who listens, thank you for
So just a little reminder, please post some questions on our chat, in the chat box that we can ask Lindsay and Owen. Lindsay, I just have a couple of questions for you. Just picking up on some of the things that Jamie mentioned in terms of contracts, and he never really identified a specific contract, and there's lots of amendments to contracts. Do you think there's a suitable contract that can be adopted for offsite construction?
I agree with Jamie, actually. I think that the contracts have got their pros and cons, or all of them. There's a recent article by Peter Hibberd, ex-chair of the JCT, and he advocated that the JCT, being a contract that's been around, tried and tested for many years, has a range of contracts that would actually fit the bill for offsite manufacturing, including constructing excellence, the construction management contract. And I agree with him to some extent. They are tried and tested. So when you're looking at variations or changes, there are mechanisms there that have seen everything thrown at them and tested. Having said that, the NEC4 is a very flexible suite of contracts. Provides an awful lot of flexibility, because we're looking at aspect of building on the site, as opposed to something quite unusual for the construction industry, whereas the mechanisms required for payment, and Jamie actually mentioned some things about the requirement for maybe payment up front, which is something that we have normally done in ordinary construction. That in itself, there's some issues there. So even though the contract provides some element of flexibility and some actual encouraging subcontractors to participate through different options within the NEC form of contracts as well, I think we still need to be looking at the mechanism for payment in particular. I think that's where the complication lies. And so I'd say that I think maybe the contracts need to be looked at again, with that, the complexity of payment to manufactured items off-site. We've always had that, where we've had materials just like curtain walling, as Jamie mentioned, but we're talking about large sums of money, and quite obviously the client is going to be very nervous about paying money up front, or we've got things that we can put in place, like we can have advance payment bonds put in place, for instance, guarantees. But they're largely, it just gets a bit more complex. So yeah, I think that there are contracts that, I'm sorry, I just mentioned NEC, JCT, there are others too, but yeah, I'd be just listing them all.
I think that it's really important, and Jamie mentioned the kind of contract design proportion element that's integrated, but as you say, there's still these payment issues around that. Also, just what, from your sort of opinion, do you think, what's the main difference between estimation for offsite construction, and how does that differ from traditional construction as well? Is there anything you would like to add to that?
I mean, when we look at manufacturing, we look at a controlled method of estimating, to be honest, to some extent. We're taking out all those uncertainties of risk that we build into our rates, because we know it's a controlled environment. We've got that health and safety shield there. There's we've got the quality control there as well. I'm not saying that there's not quality control on a construction site. I'm just saying it's much easier to manage in a factory environment. So when it comes to estimating, same thing applies though. So generally for traditional construction, we'd look at historic cost information. We look at the BCIS, so we look at contractors' own cost databases, and that would be based on basically historic cost information that's updated. Well, in manufacturing, it's very similar. They have their components list. I'd say that it's probably a lot more involved than the components are a lot smaller, down to the nth degree maybe, every screw and whatever. So you could argue that, again, that's a more controlled way of estimating. But the same thing applies. They would have their historic cost information in-house. In-house information is much better than any other information you get anyway. So over time, you'd record that information, you'd have it there, you'd update it with material updates, and just as we would with tender price indices for ordinary cost updates in traditional construction. Sorry
to interrupt you. We're just going to move on. That's excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. Our next poll is coming up, and just please post on the chat some questions for later on, and we can ask Lindsay and Owen later. So what do you think is the biggest benefit in offsite construction in regards to cost? Reliability on resource management, predictable time, delivery time, reliability, cost estimations, or life cycle costs? Our webinars are recorded and they'll be posted on our social media websites as well. I think there's a question came in about that. And next up, we'll have, after the poll results, we'll have an overview of logistics video. So biggest benefit for offsite construction is the reliable cost estimations, so with a 55% result there in our polls.
Every part of the construction operations are connected to logistics, where the materials that need to be delivered to the site or plant and equipment that needs to be used safely, precision in logistics is key. In offsite construction, when we talk about logistics, most often we mean the transportation method from the factory to the building site, as well as management of the factory supply chain. The main difference between offsite and traditional construction in logistics is the size of the components that need to be delivered to the building site. For example, steel frame elements for high-rise or infrastructure projects can have large lengths, whereas volumetric systems tend to have large widths. With precast components, the weight of the load can be a limiting factor. When designing for logistics, you should consider transportation constraints for the specific offsite system, load restrictions, site access and circulation, and lifting and handling operations. The earlier in the design stage that these factors are considered, the better. Logistics in offsite construction can bring several benefits, including reduction of deliveries to sites, just-in-time management, and alternative transportation methods. Offsite construction systems with high levels of enhancement, such as closed panels or volumetric, typically lead to a reduction in the number of vehicle movements to site. This is because instead of transporting all the materials separately to the building site, they are all pre-assembled in the offsite components in the factory and then delivered to site as one piece. This can lead to social sustainability benefits with reduced disruption to the local area. Another benefit is just-in-time delivery, where offsite components are transported from the factory to the building site at the exact time they are needed for on-site placement and assembly. It is important to load them so that the sequence of arrival to site matches the assembly sequence. In this way, the components can be lifted and assembled directly from the back of the truck, removing the need for on-site storage. With projects close to a port or a dock, offsite construction can offer the benefits of using water transport instead of road transport. Logistics via ships have inherently lower carbon emissions than transportation by road. This is especially useful for remote locations such as the Isle of Wight or the Scottish Islands in the UK. Ship transportation also offers increased opportunities for exports to destinations of the likes of Norway or New York, supporting the Construction 2025 target of increased construction exports. When designing for logistics and managing logistical operations for offsite construction, challenges can also be encountered. One of the most critical challenges is managing the factory supply chain. Offsite manufacturers tend to customize their products to clients' requirements. The selected installation materials, sheeting materials, and finishes often vary from project to project, and all of the materials for the product need to be in the factory to enable the start of manufacturing. So you see how it can be challenging to control the factory supply chain in these circumstances, considering the different leading times for each product. Another challenge is the secure transport of the offsite components from the factory to the building site without any damage. Obstacles as simple as branches near the road could penetrate the outer membranes of volumetric units, for example. The movement during transportation and lifting can also cause some defects, cracking of plasterboards, or damage from moisture in rainy weather. This is why lifting and handling operations should be planned out carefully. A couple of things to bear in mind in offsite construction logistics are the regulation differences between standards and abnormal loads, and the need for careful planning of the transportation route. You will likely be familiar with the typical sizes of heavy goods vehicles, or HGVs, in the UK. Offsite components are typically transported on multi-axle lorries with width of 2.55 meters. Loads with width up to 2.9 meters, that is, with a 300mm projection on each side of the lorry, are normal loads and can be transported without police notice. In addition, normal loads need to be below 44 tons in weight and 18.65 meters in rigid length. Abnormal loads are those that exceed these parameters and have different levels of notifications and escorting requirements depending on the size. You should also bear in mind that transport regulations are often changed and refer to the Road Vehicles Construction and Use Regulations 1986 for any updates. Transport regulations and the enforcement can also differ between England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So if your project involves transportation between these areas, you should pay special attention to planning your route and travel times. One of the main challenges in deciding the route is managing obstacles, such as bridges. On the motorway network, bridges, signs, and others are typically constructed with a clearance of at least 5 meters. You should not take this for granted on your chosen route, and instead you should always do a test drive to prevent any damage along the way. With the advancement of technology, it is anticipated that such planning could be done in a virtual reality environment. The route and any obstacles could be scanned with a mobile point cloud scanner to create an accurate model of the route and all its obstacles. Digital design and simulation software could then be used to ensure their offsite components are designed and manufactured for ease of transport. We see another future opportunity in communication technology through the more widespread use of tracking of offsite components and the materials used to make them. This can help with controlling stocks in the factory, following the transport vehicle's route, or retrieval of assembly instructions for a specific offsite component. Logistics is a key stage of all offsite projects, and it influences the design, factory production, and site operation. Transport regulations and sizes of the loads need to be considered more carefully for offsite components than for loose materials delivered directly to the building site. Some key advantages of logistics in offsite construction are reduced vehicle movement to site and the opportunity to use just-in-time deliveries to the building site. Challenges can include transport regulations for different loads in different parts of the UK, as well as the detailed planning of the travel route from the factory to site. In the future, we think we will see more use of point cloud scanning and barcode tracking in logistics for management of offsite construction. You are now offsite ready with knowledge for change for logistics management in offsite construction.
Before we move on to an overview with Dr. Owen Plantatul, we have a poll coming in. What do you think is the most important consideration in regards to logistics for offsite construction? Transport regulations, designing for logistics, just-in-time delivery, health and safety for lifting and handling. Also, if you have any questions, please post them on the chat icon, and we'll answer them in our question and answer slot later on. And the result for that poll has come in, designing for logistics has been the most important consideration in regards to offsite construction for logistics. We'll now hear from Dr. Untitled Chapter from Napier University in a recorded overview.
Hello, I'm Dr. Untitled Chapter. I'm an Associate Professor in Logistics and Supply Chain Management at Edinburgh Napier University. I'm also the Chair of the Policy Committee of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in Ireland, and I also sit on the Governing Council of CILT in Ireland. I've published quite a bit over the last number of years around logistics and supply chain management since completing my PhD in 2010. And I'm also the Associate Editor of the International Journal of Collaborative Engineering. So I'm going to give you an overview in relation to the logistics and supply chain elements of the Offsite Ready project in terms of knowledge for change and empowering change. So initially we talked about supply chain management, and that's become very much to the forefront in the current environment, and it has a very important impact on the effectiveness and efficiency of many different types of projects, and in particular construction projects and construction logistics. So when we talk about supply chain management, we talk about cradle to grave, or more even so with the environmental agenda, cradle to reincarnation. And one of the key important elements to supply chain management is information flow and coordination with those upstream and downstream within the supply chain. And logistics and procurement and other elements in relation to those are considered to be components within supply chain management itself. So when it comes to the Offsite Ready project and knowledge for change, procurement is one of those key elements in there, and also looking at negotiation. And it highlights the actual procurement cycle, which was developed by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So it looks to identify the need in the first place, also identify potential suppliers and market review. So what's available within the marketplace itself, what suppliers are available, taking into consideration what the specifications and requirements actually are. There might be a need for develop a pre-purchase questionnaire or pre-qualification questionnaire. Depending if there's a high number of suppliers potentially in the marketplace and what you're actually looking for, whether it's going to be a certain standard in relation to quality or accreditation, that you might want to pre-select some of those suppliers in that process. So there's quite a number of steps in the process to just develop a detailed requirement specification, to select suppliers to participate in requests for quotation. There's a bid and then there's a tender evaluation process, and also importantly there's a negotiation and award of contract. But also just remember post-contract elements are also to be considered, particularly in relation to performance review of suppliers, whether it's about quantity, quality or on time, or also in terms of supplier relationship management as well, that ongoing relationship with suppliers so you can get the best performance and the best product and the best construction project completion on time and in full. Also in relation to procurement, there's a focus on the negotiation element. So once the initial aspects around supplier selection and criteria have been selected in terms of that negotiation process, and that's again another important process. So there's some aspects to be considered around the negotiation process. And one of the key elements to focus on is actually just a simple term, be prepared. So what you need to necessarily do to be prepared? Well, you need to be thinking about, well, what is my range of agreement in terms of maybe product or price or timing? Also, if it's not going to go well with this particular supplier in terms of negotiation, what's your next best alternative in the process? Also, in terms of the negotiation process itself, what are going to be the steps in the process? Is there going to be an initial meeting? Is there going to be more in-depth round tables? So what's the process that's actually going to be followed in the negotiation has to be particularly outlined there as well. Also in terms of the logistics element, there's a focus on holding centres. which is very important, particularly for off-site construction and for potentially building sites with limited space in an urban potential setting there. So it has to be managed quite carefully in terms of the inbound elements, have to be scheduled. There can be quite a lot of material coming in place. There can be quite a few stakeholders from the suppliers to the contractors. So there can be quite a lot of information flow that needs to be done there as well. So from that regard, the scheduling is quite important, and also to be able to track and trace and what needs to go where at the relevant time too. So that's also important, and it links to other systems in the process. So it should be linking to the procurement system. So there is the digital skills element there too, and also linking to the tracking and tracing and the workload and the work scheduling system on the construction site itself. So they all need to be harmonized and work together and communicate with each other, so you can have an efficient and effective site, and the logistics is an important consideration in relation to that. Also, some local planning authorities are now requiring a construction logistics plan as part of the planning permission application. So this requiring how they will deal with the traffic coming in and out of the construction site, and also you can provide other details in terms of volumes and how you would deal with maybe access and other aspects around those. Also, it's important to have an awareness of abnormal loads and the implications that has in terms of route planning. So with construction and with off-site construction, the loads can potentially be substantial, which means that you might need to notify the relevant authorities, and it might also have implications in terms of your route selection going forward. So there is available software and available online sites to assist with that in terms of the notification process, but also one important element to consider in relation to this is the time requirement to give notifications to the relevant bodies, and also it's important to consider what those implications are, and could they potentially be designed out at the construction stage of the prefabrication. So logistics is key to ensuring an effective delivery of the project on time, and also in terms of cost and quality elements. So logistics is really about involving the right product at the right price, in the right place, at the right time, with the right quality and in the right condition. So that's the own plant here for Offsite Ready, Knowledge for Change.
Before we move on to our final question and answer slot, which please still post, we have a poll. So which do you think is the biggest barrier to adopting offsite construction? Culture, financial, skills shortages, or a lack of government initiatives? Other, please post in the chat box. Please keep posting questions in the chat box so we can answer them in our question and answer slots. The biggest barrier to adopting offsite construction is thinking about cultural change being the highest, and then financial and skill shortages coming in at the same sort of percentage, and lack of government initiatives. So hopefully Offsite Ready content will improve that adoption of offsite construction. Lindsay, our questions came in from Brian, which I think would for you to answer, would be good for you to answer. So he's saying that some interesting comments in regards to the benefits of costs and estimation for offsite construction. He thinks that given the controlled production environment from an estimating point of view, productivity would be far more reliable and less likely to vary versus the work being on site. So therefore, giving the client a far better cost visibility and cost certainty of final outturned cost. What do you think? Do you agree with that, Brian, or do you have anything to add there?
Absolutely, Brian. I think one of the main reasons for this as well is that strategic planning initially, so that we understand that some variations are going to happen when designs aren't fully designed to start with, and we're starting on site where clients will actually expect changes. what I'm finding with offsite manufacturing is that a client is more likely to buy into the fact that once you've designed and the design is frozen, that's been manufactured physically in a production process, and therefore they understand that changes, variations are something that can't go ahead either. So that estimating, that, as you're quite right, that in a component in that controlled environment means that we've got real costs, transparency for the clients, and very little opportunity for variation and changes. So whereas I think that it's a psychological thing really, when we start on a construction site, clients can see that they can change if they want to as a post-contract as work progresses, and that's not the case with offsite manufacturing. So that's another plus for it really, is ensuring that design is frozen and complete before we start it.
Excellent. And I suppose that kind of moves on to a question from Robert. How easy would it be for a traditional quantity surveyor to transfer their skills into offsite construction role? And I suppose that's for everybody, is transferable skills, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that quantity surveying skills, the type of training that we have, allows us to understand the procurement process, which helps us a lot in understanding that need for payment and control of materials and components on site too. I mean, I don't know whether you saw the Times article this weekend about Llangor Rourke's £350 million hospital in Wales. 12 months early, no defects, 70% off-site manufactured. And I know the quantity surveyors spend time in the factory situation environment as well as on site, so they understand fully the requirements of both aspects, if you like.
Yeah,
fully transferable quantity surveying skill. Thank
you. We have another question. Wash, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly, is a Swiss offsite company looking at entering into the UK market. Where would we start getting cost examples so that we can calculate and compare with our known costs? I think Mila mentioned something in regards to that in the overview video. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we do have standard cost databases in the UK. The BCIS would actually cover costs, the Building Cost Information Service, which is a subsidiary of the RICS, would also have cost information relating to offsite manufacturing. So there'd be good examples there.
So yeah, the RICS is the best place to start looking. Owen, I have a question for yourself. You mentioned supply chain management and also sort of performance reviews. What's the main benefit of good supply chain management in terms of offsite construction?
I think when it comes to, I suppose, procurement really across the board in terms of that supplier selection is really important, particularly when you have a project-based approach. It could be maybe a unique aspect that you might put a lot of time in terms of the planning and the design stage. So, you know, make sure you're having measures, and maybe before you select a supplier, you have your supplier evaluation, where you probably have a framework with a number of service levels or key performance indicators that you want to measure and maybe assess, and before you'd want to maybe get heavily involved with a strategic partner. So aspects around, you know, the quality, their technical expertise. It can even be, you know, their future aspects around financial. Are they going to invest more in technology as well? Can you work together on new products? Do they have R&D facilities? And even aspects around, you know, lead times and transportation as well. So it's quite important that, you know, that you evaluate suppliers, and maybe then afterwards you continue to do that. And, you know, sometimes you have the internal information, you know, if you've worked with these suppliers already, and that you're recording, and other times you have to start an initial aspect where you maybe visit some key suppliers to assess them before getting into any type of negotiation around contracts or supplies. Yeah. And
then that long-term then relationship ultimately will have benefits to production as well, won't it?
Yeah, it would definitely have. have benefits for production as you maybe grow together and work together, and maybe you learn from each other's expertise as part of that process. And also, you know, as you develop the relationship and the partnership, it can always be really helpful in terms of understanding each other's needs a bit better, or maybe in terms of even designing out inefficiencies and focusing more on the quality aspects of what the customer actually wants to get out of this situation.
Thank you, Owen. So we have a question from Colin. On a recent project, we had delays as the precast facade supplier fell behind with installation. It was very difficult to attribute blame to them, as they suggested the concrete frame and the fixings exceeded tolerance. Blame transport took time, hook time. Also, if the unique element turns up damaged, it can be caused by an immediate problem. Do you have any thoughts? I think that question is aimed at yourself, Owen.
Yeah, it can be a difficult, especially I think they said a unique item. So that's where the challenges are. I think that's something definitely to consider in terms of the design process. That can you use standardized aspects? Anytime you use something unique, you can be quite a little bit vulnerable. And the only aspect you can kind of really do there is to make sure you've adequately vetted the suppliers and you've maybe worked it for them and you have the information flow. If something goes wrong, it's best, you know, if you have a supplier that will communicate that to you early, so you might be able to take some action. But some of the kind of traditional recommendations, I suppose, if I look at it from a traditional manufacturing perspective and apply that maybe to an offsite lens, offsite context, and we're trying to maybe minimize as much as possible the uniqueness, so you can have maybe a standardized approach and have alternatives necessarily in place.
Thank you. Thanks, Owen. Thank you so much, the panelists, for the questions and answers. I really appreciate you joining us today. We have a final question coming in. So the webinar seems to be focused on modular and high capex modular factories. Do you have any comments on modular versus LGSF comparisons and benefits? Do you have any comments there?
Not so much for me from comments in relation to that. It is focused, yeah, in terms of high investment, initial high investment, but maybe as things progress through in terms of becoming maybe more mainstream, we might see maybe more key suppliers or key factories in place that might lead to maybe smaller contracts negotiations going forward.
Yeah, I think the full Offsite Ready content is focused across all areas of offsite construction, not maybe just focusing on modular construction as well. So we have another quick question just before we finish off. Do you think that the benefits of tracking components throughout the project from order to delivery to manufacture could be used to alleviate some concerns of financial risk for the client when paying stage payments? This process was visible to the client.
I would agree. I think Lindsay's going to maybe come in here as well, but I think, yeah, I definitely would agree. And it could maybe be an automated system where it would trigger payments to go potentially to the clients. So I think, yeah, that's a really good aspect to have that information and security in the process.
Lindsay, do you have any thoughts on?
I was just about to add the same thing. I think that one of the problems with payment is when payment is made, when ownership takes place. Different contracts will have different agreements as to when that will be, depends on the size of the contract. But yeah, the fact that you've got some tracking system there, a recorded system that allows anybody transparently to see when things have been delivered on site and therefore change ownership, then I think definitely is a plus for that payment and procedure.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lindsay and Owen, for all your insightful knowledge. Our webinar is recorded and it will be posted on our social network channels. Just want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we can't wait until next week when we'll have Sam Hart from Construction Scotland Innovation Centre talking all things manufacturing, offsite manufacturing. And in the meantime, please visit our website at www.offsiteready.com to access our teaching materials. We will also send out this to everyone this morning. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.